Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Beat the Cult podcast, where we fight cult like religious thinking and practices. I'm Nikki, and today I am joined by Chloe. Hi, Chloe.
Hi.
Chloe is an awesome person who follows me on Twitter, which is so interesting to me because Chloe is a Christian and I go in pretty hard on Christianity, but she's so forgiving of me, which is so awesome. What kind of led you to follow me on Twitter?
So, oh man, so I can't remember the exact moment, but I know that I basically stumbled across your page. Um,
Okay.
I've had a Twitter for much longer than I've had this one, the Chloe HSPSDA one.
Okay.
And I made this one last June, and it was part of a long story of I'd like to write books, and then these days, if you want to successfully, publish books, you need to have an online platform that is genuine.
Yes.
Like you don't like pay bots to give you followers kind of thing. Like you just
No.
and man, this is going to be kind of a long tangential answer. But um last spring in April, um it's only on my Facebook. It's not like public yet. But I had quite a meltdown breakthrough kind of thing and a lot going on in my life. It was towards the
Okay.
tail end of like a 5-month nervous breakdown.
Mm,
And
I understand that. Relatable.
and it was like a long Facebook live and kind of thing. And I mean, like I blew up in my world. I didn't touch my Facebook for quite a while after that. I had one of the worst migraines the day after. It was like an axe through
Oh,
horizontally through the side of my head. I never had a migraine like
oh,
that. Never
oh my
gotten on
goodness.
virtual medical help therapy like so fast, like because I needed something more than what I had at home to take for it. And then I discovered Benadryl. It's so cheap and wonderful. But anyway,
Yeah.
like I said,
Oh,
it's
you just
real.
discovered Benadryl.
So the tangents are real. This is the tangent. Coming back. So, part of it had to do with, part of my breakdown had to do with, I'd been trying to hold, save face in a certain way and, keep a certain control over how I came across because of some things that I had gone through. Finally,
Mhm.
after one therapy session, I just busted open, and then later on, that was in April. Then in May, I went to a conference that actually had to do with like being a safe place for people who had experienced abuse in church and who wanted church to be
Mm,
safe. And there were
interesting.
authors and people there. There's so many things I could say about so many things. Um,
Sure.
and that's when that's when I learned, like, if you want to publish books, you need to have an online platform and it needs to
Mm,
be consistent. I got some social media books. And actually, back in 2019, I had come up with this thing, Chloe, comma, HSP-SDA. Like people have their, Daniel Lewis, MD, my dad's a doctor,
mhm.
or like somebody
Oh, cool.
PhD, or somebody else RN, like they have these, the MSW, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know if I'll ever go that far or have something like that. And sometimes I'm tempted, and then sometimes I just don't know. But then I came up with this thing of like, I'm a HSP for highly sensitive person. There's a whole community and field of research on that.
Yeah.
And
I'm
then
curious to learn more about that.
that's something else. It's a biological trait. It's not a pop psychology thing. And
Okay.
so I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about like what's really, really core to me. And I was literally born with the trait that makes me an HSP. And then I was born and raised Christian in the Adventist Church,
Mm,
Seventh Day Adventist.
okay.
And
Okay.
my relationship with the institution as it currently stands of my denomination is pretty damaged, but I love our theology. So I was like, Chloe,
Mm,
HSP-SDA, like this is just me.
okay.
And then
Okay.
and I had the epiphany that like, instead of like trying to curate something, let me just go and be myself because I'm a lot. And that and I'm interested and I have a lot of things to say, and I'm just if I just go and be me and not try to edit,
Mm,
that'll just, be that. And
sure.
and then so like on Twitter, you when you first set up a new one, they ask you your interests and then they show certain things to you. And then you go on other
Oh.
pages and then they have these suggestions. And I probably found you that way.
Oh, very cool.
Because I was interested. I wasn't trying to follow just Christians. I'm just I'm interested in people and just being myself and talking with all kinds of people. And,
Mhm.
so of course, you had several thousand followers, and then your title beat the cult, it looked interesting. And then I just kind of looked over things, and I just and I hit follow. I follow a lot of people that I'm very different from. And I just
Good.
yeah, and I just saw that you are real. And I'm not oh man. I was like, but by following people who are different from me, that means that in a way I follow people that a bunch of people where I have disagreements. But here's something. There's something. There's a deeper agreement that can unify a lot of seemingly different people, and that's when you are anti-harm and you are pro the
Exactly.
value of human beings.
Exactly. Which you
And
don't have to be a Christian or religious to even be that.
right.
Yeah.
And so this could, and again, so I'm just going to be me. This could sound like an obnoxious religious pitch, but this is just me being me. In
No,
Romans
please be
2,
you.
in Romans 2, it says that, there are people who may not be formally Christian or formally religious, but they show, that they have God's law written on their heart by how they live. And
Sure,
so,
sure.
like,
I understand.
there are people who are Christian in name, and they don't, and it's not lived, and it's not lived in how they treat people. It's not lived in where God actually is in their life. There may be a lot of lip service and overt religious activity, but like in their priorities, in how they
Hmm.
treat people. And then there are people, like I like, we're just getting to know each other. It's our first day, like visibly talking back and forth. But like, by things that you've shared, you and a lot of other people, because like I had this little plan for my platform of like what I was going to post on a regular basis. I'm going to do this, and then I had a huge trauma, um, uh, really rough ordeal last fall, and it just like threw off my plans. And
Hmm.
what that meant is that I did a lot of much simpler, quieter posting and a lot of listening,
Sure.
a lot of
Okay.
following and listening, Twitter, Instagram, and whatnot, and atheist, agnostic, deconstructionists, and then there's like, and then with deconstructionists there's a whole spectrum. And
Hmm.
so I could even be classified as a deconstructionist, even though I don't
Hmm.
feel like I'm deconstructing my faith as much as like my religious experience and my worldview. And
Hmm.
some people say deconstruct, and for me it just feels like I'm doing what I've always been doing. um
Okay.
they say like, when and I'll just be real, like, when they tell you, write books and stuff, like how you build your platform, the stuff that you say in the little bio needs to, tell people something about yourself that would put something in it for them. Otherwise they're just
Sure.
right on by. But I also wanted it
Sure.
to be real for me. I'm going to regret clicking this app because it's going to keep giving me notifications, but I'll get out of it. um
No, it's okay.
and
Can
so
you
yes.
tell me a little bit more about the book that you're wanting to write and
uh
the subject?
It's a devotional on prayer, and then really quick right here.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
I just wrote, I love connecting with God and you. I hate abuse. I used emojis. I hate abuse. I love studying life. I hate
Okay.
bad answers. I
Hmm.
cry. Walk and talk with me. I'm a deep thinker and trauma survivor. Like, I can't promise any sort of perfection. I do hate
Hmm.
abuse. And when I say I hate bad answers, like I hate when I feel like somebody gives you an answer for something that doesn't make sense, doesn't match up, doesn't sort through,
Agreed. Yeah.
like that. And I see a lot of that same stuff going on elsewhere. So that was that little tangent finishing there. And you
Okay.
also hate abuse. You also hate bad answers. And I see what
Sure.
you post about and what a lot of other people are posting about and reacting to is that there's been a lot of crap. And there's been a lot of
Hmm.
terrible answers that lead to terrible implications that make people struggle unnecessarily, that make people suicidal, that make people actually kill themselves. There's
Hmm.
a lot that's perpetuated that does not express value of people, and it doesn't
Right.
express consistency. And before I saw somebody make a really good point, I would have said like, well, those people, I would have said the same thing of like, well, those people aren't real Christians. But then I saw a deconstructionist make the point of like, but here's the thing. They call themselves Christians. They go to church. They represent. And so to
Yeah,
me,
they do.
that is what a lot of real Christians look like in this day and age. So let
Yes.
me alter that
Right.
by saying like, well, they're not real Christians. Well, this is what a lot of Christianity looks like, which just kills me. It's my
Right.
literal brain. It's my literal brain. I'm like, that's not what a real Christian should be. That's not, but that's what a lot of professed Christianity looks like. So let me put it this way: it's not biblically loyal. And then,
So, in
yeah,
that case, actually, regarding biblical loyalty,
mm,
the individuals who like represent the Westboro Baptist Church, who are extremely like who are biblical literalists regarding homosexuality and other things like that, would you say, despite the progression of the church and Christians becoming a lot more accepting, that they actually are more Christian than other Christians who identify
that the Baptists
because
who are the Westboro Baptist and biblical literasts. So I'm
who
not
are
really,
actually more Christian?
so I'm hearing terms that I probably don't know the perfect definition of, but I'm guessing by reading in between the lines that, and just that it's Baptist and how they are, like biblical literates, like people who are. So not really knowing the definitions of what you're saying. My guess is that you're referring to a denomination where people take the texts, take certain
Okay.
texts at face
That's
value,
true.
and they use it to be
Yes.
abusive. Am I
Yes, very. Like they are picketing like
doing that they're more
soldiers'
real Christians?
funerals and
No, because that's another
hmm.
thing that I had. I had an interaction with somebody where I was like, "Well, they're not really biblical Christians," and they're like, "Sure, they are. They quote the Bible verse," and then my brain
Yeah.
kicks in like, and then it's gonna kick in with some math here, um, and I'll explain why. Um, so quoting one Bible verse or a few doesn't make you biblical. So like,
Hmm.
if
What about living it?
when I look at the word of when you think about the word of God and how that is supposed to be a revelation of his heart and it has history and everything else, think about us as people. I have a very my relationship with God, my view of him, it's very blended. There's the personal and then there's the intellectual, there's everything else. And because the Bible says God is love, um
Hmm.
it may not be very scholarly or whatever of me, but I'm always looking for like what is the most relationally relevant and convincing answer, and what
Hmm.
makes the most sense in terms of God is love, what makes the most sense in terms of love and how the Bible defines love and how Jesus embodied love. And
Right.
so um and so when you so let's say that somebody takes something that I said when I was younger and I was in an earlier place or I was just younger, and they take it out of context even for that time. And then they also aren't even looking at the whole spectrum of my life story and who I am, and then they say that's
Hmm.
representative of Chloe. But no, it's not.
Okay.
And so that
Okay.
is how a lot of people use the Bible. And what is really biblically loyal is when you are using or relating to scripture and people in a way that is integrous with the whole, when you are interpreting the whole to boil down to God is love and I'm going to be loving.
Okay.
So like,
So how do you reconcile like God is love? Because that is more of a New Testament. Well, that is in the New Testament. God is love. How do you reconcile that statement with the Old Testament happenings? Because Yahweh is the God referenced in the New Testament, and we all know Yahweh is a rough one. So how do you reconcile those that statement with His behavior in the Old Testament?
so um so many places my brain could go. So when I was getting my religion degree, I had some different Old Testament classes, and then I had to do some research papers, exegesis, and I didn't really know what to do because I didn't have questions. Because at that time, having been raised a certain way, I didn't have questions about the goodness of God. So I asked. Um, I asked an agnostic friend and an atheistic friend, like, what Bible passage would you want me to study? One of them had to do with alcohol. I wrote it in 2011. What seemed to
Hmm.
be, the Bible condoning alcohol, and yet Christians are all like, don't drink. Um,
Well, a lot of them.
there's, yeah, I have friends in archaeology who are like, wine back then was cleaner than regular water, and there was some natural fermentation because it sat out, but it wasn't intentionally alcoholized like stuff today, and it was more
Okay.
sanitary than water. So
Sure.
that was a short little answer, from archaeology and cultural studies, whatever.
That's
But
interesting.
my other friend mentioned like there's this passage in Numbers that looks like God is like, do genocide, and so that is yeah,
Yeah,
and
there's quite a bit of genocide.
yeah, there's a lot of war and killing, and then I've seen posts of yours where it looks like, where it looks as if, stuff to do with like women's sexual abuse and how could God say this kind of thing.
And slavery as well.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot. There is a lot to untangle. There's a
Sure.
lot to study, and I'm not going to try and I'm not going to try and simplify over any of that. I'll speak to what I know.
Sure.
Um, and I will name drop for Ty Gibson and David Ashrick. There's this one, but I'm going to speak for myself and my own studies. But Ty Gibson both of them actually were not raised Christian. They're both Adventist. In kind of interesting, unique they have their own ministries,
Okay.
and both of them were raised atheist without faith and such, and pretty
Okay.
staunchly atheist. Ty Gibson has shared publicly and openly that he is a domestic violence survivor from his childhood. His
Oh.
mother is a
Oh.
survivor, and his sisters and things. So, and then David Asher gets, I think, more like, growing up in the punk rock life and some other things. And
Punk rock life.
yeah, stuff like that I recall. I am like going through my memory, like I think I remember these terms, kind of thing. And
Okay.
while David Eshrick has one good, a really good sermon, I think it's like Jehovah Joshua Genocide or something like that, in a New Testament series. I had written my paper before that, and I liked what he said, but I think that what I got into with my paper actually helped me have it more in focus.
Okay.
And he makes some good points, though. And then Ty Gibson, he's done different messages that talk about his journey, what he went through, and how he
Sure.
came, to be a person of faith. And he has this one really good message to do with women. There was an event. I'm telling you, I'm tangential. I will get back to your question. There was an event at my university before I came back from being a pastor's wife that had to do with like Rise Up Against Abuse rally. And then towards the
Okay.
end of it, Ty Gibson gave the sermon in the big church that had to do with like Rise Up, Daughters of Eve. And he addressed in a more broken down way than I can do the things that I will touch on to the best of my ability, about like about the history of women, that it's not a noble history, and that throughout all history man has held her down. She's struggled for equality, for wellness, well-being,
Sure.
and then
Yeah.
like these verses and all these places, like this is weird and what's this, and I'm breaking it down. So I'm like putting that in there, and I have not getting any endorsements or anything like that. Like it's just I know them. They're helpful resources.
Okay.
Anyway. And so how do I reconcile? Okay,
Yes.
so when I was studying this, she was a professor, but I never took a class from her, and she recommended this book to me called "Is God a Moral Monster?"
I think I've heard of that.
It's I didn't read the whole book. I just looked at the parts I needed.
Okay.
How I got the college, it's hard to do. They assign you, so it's like let me get as much reading as I can done to get the thing done. So and then I'm gonna. So okay. So have you seen zombie movies?
I've seen a few. World War Z.
But you know how the whole zombie mythology is that they used to be people and now they're just not there.
Yeah.
And the only thing to do is to put them down.
Shoot him through the head. Yeah.
So,
well, that's the method that was advocated for in The Walking Dead. So
yeah, I thought like the first 5 or 6 seasons, and then shortly after Negan came on the scene, I just couldn't.
Glenn, after what he did to Glenn, I had to stop.
I missed sleep.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's where a lot of people seem to stop, right when Negan busted Glenn's head literally open.
Yeah.
That was a tough moment in my life.
Like, so HSP, highly sensitive person, I would never be talked into watching zombie anything. But then when my husband told me that really it's a show about the exploration of human nature.
It is. It's
then
excellent.
I was like, okay. And plus I wanted to get to know him better, and he was drawn to watching it. So like, that's how. And so I would have to watch it clutching a pillow, and then I would have nightmares waking up in the middle of the night. Walker, literally.
Walker. That's so funny. I'm not like that's funny, but
really?
like Walker. Like, oh, really?
Sitting up straight in bed, screaming it out. But back to your question, because I'm not trying to get away from it. But I'm telling you, ADHD, the tangents, they're real. So, so yes, as a Christian, I believe in angels and demons warfare, and how people say that that in Christianity people say we believe that like there's no middle ground, that either you are developing more to the image of Christ, and if there's no middle ground, then the only alternative is that if you're not becoming more in the image of Jesus, you're becoming more in the image of Satan. That's what I've deduced. And
Interesting.
you think about Satan, and and from my
Do you
Christian book,
believe Satan is an actual like person,
I do.
or is Satan how so?
So and then I guess we'll get back to the other, but I mean, so yes, I was raised, but then I actually did my own, reading in and if your friend was Adventist, then you're probably familiar with the name Ellen White and
We never got really into, because like it was high school, so we just kind of like hung out.
okay.
Her friends, or I'm sorry, her parents, like her dad was a pastor, but we never like talked about
So
like
she was a
her
pastor's kid.
theology. Yeah, she was a pastor's kid. Danae
So she
Gator.
probably wanted a break
Yeah,
from all the
she's cool people.
theology.
Danae has always been, well, I haven't spoken to her in like 20 years, but like, yeah, about 20 years. Danae was very receptive to her parents' religious beliefs,
Okay.
and just a pretty heavy advocate. And as far as I know, based on Facebook, she's still a very conservative, I guess, Christ-centered woman.
Okay.
So there was never really any resistance on her part. She never tried to get away from it. I just remember like not being like her not being able to celebrate holidays and eating like vegan hot dogs with apple juice. That's what I remember.
That
It was rough.
I can picture the subculture that's connected to.
Right. But she was, I mean, her family was cool people. But no, I haven't heard of Ellen White though.
Okay. So people who do evangelism series and such, whether with verbal dexterity or clumsily, they'll be like, whatever you do, don't Google Ellen White, never mind what the internet says. And I'll just be frank that like she is one of the founders of the church. I really love her writings. I actually
Okay.
quote her writings in the book that I'm working on. But
Okay.
she is somebody, and I'm just going to be myself and be transparent, because people are like, oh, well, if you say this, then people freak out. We believe that she was a prophet. She was one of the
Okay.
founders of our church. And she, and so she wrote quite a bit. She wrote a lot, and I look at what she's written, and I started to eventually, like, some people, they're raised with a lot of Ellen White stuff shoved down their throat as if it's on the level with or above the Bible. So there's kind of
wow.
if you look up Andrew Curbs on Twitter and Instagram, he has his handle called Deconstruct Everything.
Okay.
Former Adventist, and both like, he says, I think, atheist and humanist, where he's not, his page, he's also got several thousand followers. He really good, genuine guy. He's a therapist in religious trauma. He is familiar with like the kind of the unique issues that can arise from the dysfunction unique to our denomination. You would talk about beat the cult. There are cultish subsections of Adventism where there's where people have taken, and again, they do things with Ellen White's writings that other people do with the Bible. They take little bits out, and then they focus on it, take it out of context. They use it to beat people with. And then, you're going to find a lot. I'm sure you'll find plenty if you were to Google about like people saying Adventism's a cult and all this stuff about Ellen White. I'm not going to try and hide that. Every denomination has their stuff. So this is connected to that. But so she wrote a book called The Great Controversy, and she goes into more detail, and it's a very prophetic book. There's like a section in the beginning that has to do with history, a section in the middle that kind of like goes up and looks at stuff from like the origin of evil and stuff in heaven. And then there's a section towards the end where she's like talking about the future. I am that person, and I have these beliefs, and this is just, I'm being me. So there's places in scripture where not Adventists as well as Adventists will draw. I think they're like in Ezekiel, Isaiah, and such, that have to do with like the origin of evil and what happened in heaven that first created sin, and that, where Lucifer became Satan, and took like a third of the angels with him.
The fallen angels.
Yeah. And so,
of course.
And
I was raised with that story as well.
Yeah. And so she goes into very compelling detail in The Great Controversy about that. And I really love how she brings certain things into focus, because I'm looking at dynamics, and I actually finally read this book. This is like a classic of my denomination. I didn't read it till I was 27, 28.
Oh, it's okay. Most Christians still haven't read the Bible, and they've been clinging to it for decades and still haven't read it. So
I
you are given a pass there.
see. I just been through. Oh goodness, we had just been through the beginnings of what led to my breakdown video when I was a pastor's wife, and
Oh, you were a pastor's wife. You were a first lady.
for 4 years,
Oh,
fresh as a newlywed. That's a whole story. And that was the beginning. My experience there was the beginning of like, the altered and I call it a divorced relationship with the institution, but that I'm very
hmm.
loyal to our theology. And even saying it's divorced, like I'm not off the books, and actually we're transferring our memberships to like a new church we found where we feel comfortable.
Okay.
It's a different church culture, but it just feels good. It's close to home. We'd happen to find it. Um,
Okay.
but like the institution, like the Adventist TV channels, or like Adventist leadership in the different structures, independent people with their own independent niches, and then also people who are like leaders in the structure. I
Okay.
don't I take people one at a time, and I'm always kind of like evaluating. I have quite a bit of trauma at this point, so there's the hypervigilance, and then you also have you're looking at things, you're also looking and analyzing things from past experience and just from hypervigilance in general and stuff.
Okay.
So I was raised knowing of this book, The Great Controversy, and that's a big Adventist
Okay.
classic, and it has to do with
Sure.
prophecy and end times, and then there's and all kinds of things, and I knew certain things about it, but I'd never read the whole
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of like big classic Ellen White books I've never read the whole thing of, and then some
Okay.
smaller ones I've digest quite a bit. Um,
Okay.
and I was not raised with her shoveled down my throat, so that really helped me, because other people, they were raised where she was used to abuse them, and now they don't even want to hear her name. And
Oh, okay.
and
Wow, that's crazy.
it's a real thing. And so because we went through something really awful that was dragged out over months, and we'd been married less than 2 years. um,
Hmm.
I was sexually harassed by my husband's boss. It was not physical, and
Oh my gosh.
and it was stretched out with some other things, and then there was drama with the church. They put us in a really important and visible church in their conference when they knew that we didn't even have master's degrees. We were fresh out of undergrad, newlyweds. I think that they thought that, just from different things I've pieced together, that maybe we're not liberal or conservative, we're just us. And they think that
Yeah.
we would be different than we were based on where we went to school and where Russell grew up. My husband grew up with no religion, and he grew up in Portland, Oregon. I was raised
Mm.
I was raised in a bubble, like homeschooled to boot.
Yeah, I was in high school and it sucked. I wanted a normal life, but no.
Yeah, and so and then it was a big mixture of things. There were like two waves of it. They seemed initially disconnected, but then there was like anonymous letters, getting ripped out of our
Hmm.
home, slandered, getting put
Oh
on
no.
probation with no guarantee of employment beyond the end of the year when there's just 3.5 months left to go.
Oh,
The
that
man
sounds
who
stressful.
harassed me was put in charge of mentoring my husband on a weekly basis for his people skills. He never even formally apologized or anything. It was all handled a certain way, and he stayed on for a long time. There's just a bunch of stuff. And
Oh,
then you toss in like a car accident with two 18-wheeler semi trucks where I nearly got killed. And
oh my
there was a
gosh.
lot that happened. It was really, really rough, and it was really hard on our marriage.
Yeah,
And
I
and
can
then
imagine.
like they moved us from where we were into the conference church, which is like more of a basically they moved us to be temporarily on probation closer to the people who did this to us. And
Oh,
I had
okay.
to like really the pressure to save face. I mean, and for me, just from some survival mechanisms from before, I was like, I'm not going to show any emotion. I'm just going to keep my head down and do the work, and I'm not going to
Okay.
give them any more bullets to shoot me with. There was
Hmm.
sexual slander and all kinds of devaluation, and
Okay.
I was, and this was the church I was raised to love and raised in, that I trusted. And I remember calling
Oh
um,
gosh.
a professor who also was a woman who performed our marriage ceremony, and she'd known me since I was 6. And I was just walking in circles on the last day of our packing, just like, is this real? Does this really happen? Do people really do
Mhm.
this in our church? And she was like, I'm so sorry, baby. Yes, it does. And
Oh wow.
that was the beginning of a lot. So all this, it was like all brutal and everything. And I was like, this is all happening to us because of the Great Controversy. I should really read that book. And
Gracious.
then it's
And
like,
the Great Controversy goes into detail regarding Satan and Satan being a person. And
yeah, it starts off with religious history, starting at the fall of Jerusalem, goes through for a while, and then it goes
okay.
like up into like the heavenly sanctuary, the origin of evil, blah blah blah, some stuff right there about some more spiritual dynamics and focus, and then it goes to
Sure.
like, looking at the future. But yes, him being a person. So because we had just gone through all this abuse, which made the Me Too movement a huge lifesaver to me, because I was so isolated, and then I joined an online group that just brought oxygen back into my soul.
Oh,
Um,
good. Okay.
I hang on a second. Sorry, yeah, the emotions and then my train of thought is even worse. But this happened to us because the Great Controversy. I should really read that book. And then this happened after a bunch of abuse. So when I was reading through this whole book, there we go. I saw these themes throughout the whole book of dynamics between abusers and the people that they target, and the dynamics.
Sure.
And so I really love that actually when she's talking about the origin of evil, she says sin is an intruder. To justify it is to excuse it. There's kind of like a mystery. You can't really know exactly why or how it entered. Obviously there's a story of how Lucifer became Satan, but that it's you can't give a rationalization for it. You can't give a justification for it. And you think about everything evil in the world and everything that happens, don't give any kind of rationalization or whatever. Like, when people are suffering, oftentimes very reflexively, we ask why. And it's not as much that that knowing why will actually take the pain away, but it's this reflexive question. But the thing is that there's no good. You can get all the answer in the data about how something happened and what led to this and the other and what influences caused this. But knowing why doesn't take away the fact that it just never.
Yeah, it doesn't really fix anything to know why.
Yeah, and she brought that into focus, and then she because as so I said, we believe she's a prophet, and the Bible talks. There's like 2 or 3 lists in the New Testament about the listings of spiritual gifts, prophecies in there. In Revelation, they say the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy, and we believed, that like, later, and there's different ways that different denominations believe about prophecy. And my best friend is not an Adventist, and she has shared with me about other people's relationship with what they see as prophecy. And I agree. It's not just foretelling the future. It's also speaking truth to power. It's also speaking truth to power, like silence breakers, like anybody who calls it institution on its crap. That's prophetic.
So, okay. So I'm sorry?
You have a bit of a prophetic voice.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Because, you're speaking truth to power. You are calling, a lot of what's really, prophetic. And if you look at a lot of where there's prophets in the Old Testament, the Old Testament, we all came back from there. It's like, it's rough, but like there's a lot in the Old Testament, especially in the minor prophets, that has to do with like, stop exploiting the vulnerable, stop taking advantage, stop being unjust, stop being cruel, stop doing all this to these people. It's actually a righteous rage against exploitation and abuse.
That's right. And that's the goal of the page. I've always been curious about kind of the delineation between the statements of let's not continue the abuse and God as the representative, but with God's continued abuse of his people, even down to wiping out all of them and, preserving 8.
Like the flood?
Of them. Yeah, the flood.
Okay,
which
so I
didn't happen, but it's still the story itself.
Sure, the dynamics appear troubling. So I did a little. I actually started something I didn't finish. Story of ADHD life, starting things you finish. But
there's a common thread.
This conversation too, but so there's this really key line in that first chapter of Genesis that he saw that the thoughts of people were only evil all the time. And so if you
That's so interesting.
So here's
because nothing is only one thing all the time. Like a thought, people, I'm sure that people's thoughts were not all the time evil. But even if they were.
Well, let's suspend judgment and dig into like the implications of this. If that's okay.
I'm curious. Oh, sure. I'm curious. to hear how this works, because I've heard this story before, and typically the pattern goes is that the people in the Bible were so evil and misbehaving so egregiously, which honestly the story is different, because the story is derivative of a previous Mesopotamian religion, and it was taken from the Epic of Gilgamesh and written a separate way. And the way it's portrayed in the Epic of Gilgamesh is that the humans were so loud and annoying, and that's why the gods flooded them. But it was adjusted for Judaism to where the humans were being so supposedly evil, and that justified gods wiping them out. So that's how I was taught the story. Or
and so I'll just, like, we were taught differently, but I can't give you the scholastic regurgitation, and I'm not interested in, like, but we were taught differently, and I'm like, I hear you, and then the bells that go off in my head is that, like, actually the bells that go off in my head is simply that it was the other way around, that it was the flood account first, and that the Gilgamesh and everything else came after. And that there's also and I remember hearing that there are actually multiple cultural narratives that have to do with the worldwide flood or something like that,
of
and that it was
course,
other these other faith traditions that had these mythologies that, so, like,
exactly.
I guess different people teach that one came from before the other, and then you and I are flipped on that. But so if we're going to look at the text and look at what it's saying, and then, like, just get into the implications of that. So if you're going to believe it and look at the implications, what I got into when I studied is that if thoughts were only evil all the time, then, and the thoughts lead to actions, then what I saw and what I deduced is that everybody, it had just become abuse and harm all over the place. Like you mentioned, people being too loud or misbehaving, like they weren't being perfect. And what I and a lot of Christianity today has become behavior management and performance pushing and fear mongering and guilt tripping. There's,
Yes.
and it's like, you need to be like this, you need to look like this. But
Hmm.
what I look
Behave
at,
like this.
what
Yeah.
I've studied and looked at is that is that, like, it's if that what I and I can't, I could pull up different documents that I had, like, written and started to write about, but basically I'll just shoot from the hip that, like, deducing that if the thoughts of all human beings were only evil all the time, evil can mean that you're at the place of, like, aggression, or it just, like, or you're just, like, beaten down, and it's still, like, thoughts that are rooted in separation from God, but you're victimized by the people who have more power. But basically it was irredeemable, and people were just hurting people.
Irredeemable.
Like, in the sense that, like, let's say, like, we look at psychology, there are people who go on death row who need the needle, and then people who just, the best thing you can do for them is to keep them in an institution.
They can be rehabilitated.
Well, some people can, and then some people can't. And then if you think
Sure.
about where pathology, like, let's use a technical, like, where pathology progresses, some people
Of
can.
course.
I just had a big discussion recently with my sister about, I have two biological sisters and a chosen sister. Chosen sister
Okay.
I'm really referring to because we live together. And
Okay.
I hate hopelessness and powerlessness, and I don't easily get to a place of believing that something can't be redeemed or rehabilitated. But we see
Yeah.
that there are just some people who can't be. Hitler, not somebody who could be
Hitler.
rehabilitated. Trump, oh God.
Trump.
And,
Putin.
and before seeing some true story movies, I would say people of the KKK, but there are stories of people in the KKK coming out.
That's true.
Yeah,
There's this Black guy who went to some KKK meetings just to learn more, and actually befriended one of the leaders, and the guy actually came out of the KKK due to their friendship. It was kind of interesting.
There's all sorts of really neat movies that are based on true stories, like The Best of Enemies.
I've
Have you
never
seen
heard of
that
that. No, The Best of
Oh,
Enemies.
The Best
What
of
is
Enemies,
that?
I believe, is what it's called. And I can picture her face, but I can't remember her name.
Taraji P. Henson?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I
Civil
saw
rights
it.
activist.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's
So when it comes to irreconcilable behavior, why couldn't the God, like, give humans that chance? Because if God created humans knowing that we would ultimately not be able to live up to his standards, why not give us a little bit more grace? Because the when he flooded the earth, according to the narrative, the children, like unborn children, were killed as well. And the unborn children, they did not have the capacity to think evil thoughts, but still received the same punishment, supposedly, for the behavior of their parents. How would that be justifiable?
That is something that I'll have to wrestle with, because that's a question I haven't been asked. And then that makes me like there's no way to say that there weren't children or unborn children. Like, there's no way to say that. But then, I also, my brain, feels like there's, from what I've read, I don't remember a mention of that. But at the same time, there's no way to say that there weren't kids, and so that's a valid question that I'll have to wrestle with. And from what I've looked at, like, why couldn't he give more grace and chances? And then to that, I know that there were, people use this term, the antediluvians. God had been trying to work with them for thousands of years. And from the time that Noah started preaching about building the ark to when it was finally the end, that was over 100 years of trying. Over 100 years of trying and letting them know, giving them a chance. That's
right.
Like, there's that angle, and there's that thought, and
that's what I was told as well. And that, I mean, of course, that's how the story progresses, is that Noah was warning them and preaching and trying to alert them to God's displeasure in order to basically change their behavior. I've always felt that if that method isn't working, in order to preserve the innocent, and even to give some slack to the individuals that you created who you knew could not live up to your standard, try a different method. Do something, be more versatile in your attempts to change people's behavior and change their minds. Because even after Noah was, his family survived, they were still engaging in behavior that was evil.
Yeah, there was still like there's, and so then my brain differentiates between, we all have sinful natures, and then there comes a point of, there's been so much that's taken over that there's not anything else to work with. Like when people hit a point where it's like, you need an organ transplant, like we can't make this organ better, and of course everyone does everything they can to prevent getting to that point. But there's that, and I mean, but you're bringing up the kids in that in that story. I mean, that's a legit valid question.
Sure. But with the organ transplant analogy, you don't take out the whole human because an organ is gone bad.
Right. And and that's one example, but then there's also, like, there's medical conditions where the whole human, like, sometimes
just dies.
Where the whole human, they're all their systems. Like there aren't enough transplants that where there's not enough life support machines, to just make it possible for everything to be transplanted,
That's true. But I mean, a person's, I mean, I understand it's an analogy, but a person's inability to be saved, I guess, health wise, if God was the one making,
because disease and then free will and that other, there's some places where the metaphors don't really carry over perfectly.
Right, where they don't necessarily coincide. But with the we're talking about God and God's expectations. If God's expectations were for humans to change their behavior, but God ultimately made humans evil, it seems kind of dishonest on God's part, because God is all powerful and all knowing. And if God is all knowing and already knew that this was the behavior to be exhibited, then is it really fair to expect people to change?
Well, I get that logic. And then when you mentioned, like, God made people evil, that is where we differentiate. Because, and this is, giving credit back to a point that Ty Gibson made when he was, like, growing up with what he did and before he came to, believe in God. And he was like, my reality was two things: pain and love. And how can a God who's good allow all this? Because if I had all that power, I would do this, this, and this. And
of course,
what he worked through and came to is that love requires freedom, and that freedom is risky. And so, and what I'll break this down to is that, love can't really be love without the freedom to say no. Otherwise, it's abuse and control.
Love receiving it or love
No,
giving?
like love
A
can't
giving
be
lover.
something. There can't be a real love relationship, and something cannot be really happening in the context of true love unless there is the freedom and safety to say no. Like, think about
Mm.
the dynamics of how we define rape. You know,
Mhm.
it isn't just the forcible, violent, makes a movie rated R kind of that. It's also if a woman is so scared about what will happen if she says no, or what she knows will happen if she tries to say no, that she is not
Mm.
really consenting. She is complying to survive, and that's still rape.
Sure. Yes, it is.
And so like she doesn't have the freedom to say no, like not really, without
Mm.
something horrific happening.
Yeah, there will be
That's
consequences.
and so that's not a loving relationship. That's not really love. That's a context of abuse and control.
It is. It is an abuse, a context of abuse and control. But I mean, kind of along those lines, though, with the Christian God, if you do not succumb to his desires or to his love, you will be punished for that. Um,
So there's
what
that.
in this Seventh Day Adventist, how does that punishment kind of work? Is there
Well,
a traditional hell? Or
there's that. I get that logic and whatnot. So what I was working into about the whole love is not love without the freedom to say no, and that freedom involves risk, is
Mhm.
that, so that was building up to kind of explaining where we differentiate and disagree about God making humans evil, like, because it does seem like a total abusive setup. Like, what, you're going to make us like this and then punish us if when we fail, when we're guaranteed to fail? Of course, that
Sure,
looks like a terrible setup.
sure,
Um,
sure.
and so, there's the context of Lucifer becoming Satan in heaven, and then God creates this world. And what happened here, by the way, is like this whole battle of ideas, kind of like political elections, where it's all
Mhm.
about these mind games and these psychological verbal battles. And Satan brought up the accusation that God is not really good, that he's not really love, that he's controlling, and that Satan presented himself as somebody who's just trying to help everybody be free, and
Sure.
being a controlling killjoy. So the only way to clear that so first of all, God had the power and the total right to just wipe everything out, hit control, hit control, hit control, start over, start over, start over. But where is the authenticity? Where's the authentic relationship in that? Because you're just like
There's not one, and
you're,
that's the
you're
problem.
well, let me, if you don't mind, I'll work into something, and
Sure.
so for that to not be the case, there has to be freedom. And so when he created the world in the Garden of Eden, there was there you know there's an abundance of just paradise, and then so that it can't just be like, well, you just created this context where nothing could ever go badly, and so they can't really make choices. You've just made this perfect bubble. There's the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. There had to
Mhm.
be one place somewhere where they had the ability and the freedom to potentially make a different choice. Otherwise, they're just in this bubble where everything is rigged.
Did
And
God know, though, with God being all knowing, that they were going to make that choice?
yeah, yeah. And then I know that brings up a bunch of things that I need to. Um, what that gets my brain to is that yes, he knew, but also that would be the case on in like after Lucifer becoming Satan, and after those accusations, anywhere that God would create something, or anywhere that was already created and existent, there has to be the freedom to make a choice. And then yes, he could know that it's just going to be messy and brutal, and so he could just start over. Or then there's the fact of, like, since he says he's love and he wants what's real, and he's not just going to hit reset and reset. Um, bear with me here.
Sure.
I know I'm not praying,
There
but
was
I mean, if I
something
was,
no, you're good.
it's like my train of thought. Hang on,
you,
but
you can
like,
pray on the show. That's fine.
yeah, no. I mean, silent, whatever. But like, hang on a minute. Um, just bear with me for a second. Hang on, my train of thought will come back. Um,
That's fine.
And I'm not trying to like make this all cookie cutter tied up in a bow so I win. It's not like that.
No, there's no winning or losing.
Yeah, and I just want you to know that's not where I'm trying to come from. There was a point, and then sometimes if it's emotionally charged, my train of thought will go. Love isn't love without the freedom to say no. And yes, he knew ahead of time, but the authenticity of love and all of us were worth him having. We were love being real, and all of us, even with all the pain and everything else, it's all worth it to him, such that he developed a plan that would redeem all the evil, redeem all the pain, heal it all. But yes, it does take an infuriatingly long time. And so the tough answer that I have is, and the thing is childhood sexual abuse, rape, trafficking, what people have done to pregnant women in wars.
Yeah, that's
evil.
rough.
Like, there is so much evil in the world that's like, how could all this mess be worth it? How can you be a good God, a loving God, and then all of this horrible evil in in every conceivable way happen, and then that still all get reconciled? And something that I can stretch my imagination to it, and then also just on faith, like if he's God, and he's a God big enough for me to depend on, a God big enough to hold all my crap, and a God big enough for everybody to depend on and to hold everybody's crap, then how can he be a God small enough for me to fully understand? And that's a strain of logic. Like how can I, if he's big enough to be more than enough for me, more than enough for everybody on the planet, and to not run out of juice, to not be overwhelmed or too weak, and to have the power to redeem it all, and to just be there for everybody, in the ways that he defines, like, then how can a God that big be containable and fully understandable by my finite, fallible, brain that has, suffered from trauma and, struggles? Like, there's that logic. Like, if he's big enough for me to depend on, big enough to make himself available in the ways that he does to billions of people, how could he be small enough to fit inside my understanding?
I understand that. That's I can understand that question. I have always had questions kind of along those lines of, if one can't necessarily understand something thoroughly, how can one trust it to be there, or trust it to be loyal continually? Because God is a very complex concept, and it's variant amongst each person. I always say that there's 8 billion versions of God. So that's always something that's intrigued me.
Well, it's ironic that you say that, right? As one of the 5 cats in this house shows up next to me.
5 cat? No, and you just discovered Benadryl after having 5 cats?
Allergies. Benadryl helps you go to sleep, and that's what helps with migraines. Because
it does do that too.
Yeah, THC was not helping, and I couldn't take St. John's wort anymore because I got on a prescription antidepressant in the fall before that meltdown. And normally for migraines, I would do ibuprofen, Tylenol, and St. John's wort. But after I got on prescription meds, couldn't do St. John's wort because it messes with prescription meds. And and then the THC CBD blend that I had was not cutting it. I mean, it was it was like an axe horizontally through this. I've never had a migraine.
Yeah.
And then I was like sobbing on the video chat, and she's like, well, at the ER, they would give you the ibuprofen and Tylenol, and they would give you Benadryl, because the best thing for migraines is sleep. And then,
of course.
And it was great. It knocked me out, and now I use that. So
Benadryl's pretty great.
Yeah, and then
ZzzQuil is Benadryl. Diphenhydramine.
Huh?
Diphenhydramine, the main ingredient in Benadryl.
It's also in whatever.
ZzzQuil. Yep. ZzzQuil. Yeah. That's what I use too.
Nice.
Because my body kind of laughs at Benadryl now. I've been taking it for so long, but for some reason ZzzQuil works. I'm like, it's the same ingredient. It's not even that different.
And if you mix Benadryl and melatonin together, But at this point,
Oh,
I got to a point where like I'm on trazodone to help my brain shut up enough for me to go to sleep. I used to be a champion
see, I
sleeper,
respect
but one of the
that.
things of trauma and ADHD for me is that
Sure.
like I can't, even when I'm exhausted and I
All
have
right.
chronic fatigue, I can't get my brain to shut up so that I can settle down and go to sleep. So, but yes, Benadryl was like
Same.
really got that. So you mentioned, what was that question right before? I know because I was like, the cats have it. Oh, like
How
how,
can a
like,
God so big, and therefore not conceivable be trusted to be consistent in one's life?
okay, so, um, I had and it's not because I had a post, but I did have a post. It's like you don't have to know God completely to know Him genuinely. And let's put it.
Mhm.
So this is, and this isn't just with the cats. You can carry this over to kids too. So can children cannot fully intellectually, cognitively grasp the reality and everything that a parent can. They can't even
Sure.
fully intellectually and cognitively grasp their parent, let alone the whole world. There is
Sure.
there is a disparity between the two. And then like, okay, so my cats are different species. Okay, they have smaller frontal lobes than dogs, and they're a different species. My cats
Yes.
cannot cognitively grasp who I am and everything that I know, but but
Oh, so
but
cute.
but they can get to know me and trust me even though they can't fully understand everything about me. They can get to know enough of me, and children
Okay.
can get to know enough of a safe adult because parents
Sure.
are always safe, but a child can get to know enough of a safe adult to be able to
Okay.
trust, even if they can't fully understand or grasp everything about what they know and what they see and do.
Oh, good. Okay, that's a strong analogy.
So
That's strong. Yeah.
there's that. And I mean, and I've thought about all this because I'm like, and especially more than ever, it's like I was raised with this, but like, how is this, because that's the other thing. I've seen how like some people, they say it's the presence of God, experience of God, when it's really just emotions and biochemicals firing around. and
Sure.
and
That's what
so
I
like,
wonder as well.
yeah, and so here's the thing. I have a really strong bent towards the evidence of experience. Hold on just a second. Heather? Hold on a minute. She's going to need to get ready for an appointment in just a few minutes. Hang on just a second.
Oh, no, you're good.
Sweetie. Hey, sweetie. In about 15 minutes, you're going to need to leave.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you don't have to be sorry. You're napping. Love you. Sorry.
I
Okay.
need you in my life. Like, get up and do stuff. Like, okay. I know. Me too. I'm lost over here. Like, I'm gonna have to call Chloe. Chloe, make me get up and do stuff. So,
So, let's see here. So, where were we right before that? You said strong
well,
analogy, but then other things. I want, and I mentioned experience. That experience is a big deal to
sorry.
me. But then, of
Oh, yeah,
course,
yeah.
experience as evidence can be hard for the people to accept or believe in. Like,
Yes, anecdotal.
yeah. Now, here's the
Yeah.
other thing. And I say this. Um,
Keep talking. I've got something in my eye. I'm gonna go try to get it out, but keep talking.
okay, you can hear
Sorry.
me. Oh,
Yes, I can hear
you're
you. I'm just
buzzing.
gonna
Okay.
stop Cam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's
So,
mascara. I'm not sure.
and I wear contacts and I'm not wearing glasses, so I get it. And just eyes in general, whatever you get in there is, the eyes have so many nerves. Let me see here. Hold on a minute. Where were we? What was that? Oh, experience. Okay. So, I was raised, and I was raised in a certain way that for a long time I didn't really have any questions. And then for me, even when I was, love you, and for me, even when I was, even when I started, entertaining some questions, it wasn't because I felt like my faith was at risk. What?
Okay.
No, it's not because of you, but you definitely gave me more questions.
Is Heather your mom or?
Heather is my chosen sister.
Oh, okay. Oh, you said you lived with
Yes,
her.
yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
very cool.
yeah.
Is Heather Seventh Day Adventist as well?
No, she is a believer. I don't think she doesn't really belong to one denomination, and I think that she plans for it to stay that way.
Oh, good. So she's
And
like
then
non-denominational.
well, yeah, her story is hers to tell, but she has lived a life that has made me more than ever no stranger to questions about God.
Oh, cool.
So
Well,
she has, she asks a lot of really important questions. And people who want, people who don't want to leave their bubble where everything works would be frustrated, like, why can't you just leave, why can't you just take what I'm saying? But it's like, no, look, there are experiences outside the bubble and they create real questions that deserve to be wrestled with. And
exactly.
Heather is somebody who has brought more wrestling into my faith journey, and also affirmation.
Hmm.
like um there's just a lot of ways that God's used each other. We want to get tattoos on like the inside of a finger, because there's this verse, Psalm 68 verse 6, God puts the lonely in families. And
That would be great.
there's a story of like how we all became a chosen family, and her kids are my godchildren and all that.
Oh, that's
So
lovely. How did you kind of become, just a quick synopsis of how you and Heather kind of started to hang out? And
I
because
mean,
chosen sister is a privileged position in someone's life.
it is. Well, the G-rated short version is that we met through the Me Too movement online support group, and
Okay.
after
Oh,
and this is the short G-rated version, that like after almost I'd say after about 18 to 20 months talking online and a couple visits, I helped her transplant um, from another state here to Michigan. I live in Michigan,
oh,
and
okay.
another state about 8 hours away.
Oh.
And it was a big adventure in the middle of the pandemic. And adventure is again a soft word, because adventure is all manner of beautiful and brutal experiences thrown together.
Right.
That's the short G-rated version, and we've been through a lot
Okay.
together, a lot of life and death stuff together. Um,
Oh, well,
and
it's good you have that support. That's awesome.
we both are there for each other, yeah. And we both we couldn't have had more different lives in so many ways, but we are like neurologically, temperamentally, personality wise super crazy similar. And it's just been, that's a story for another time. Not ready to like pop that on YouTube right now. you know
No worries. You do not have to. I find it very interesting. Just kind of your whole story altogether.
there's like I told you I wouldn't have trouble talking. We could do this again and again, like, hey Chloe, you need a filler.
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely. I love having people back on. My last guest has been on twice. So I love people coming back on the show because there is so much to talk about,
yeah.
especially when it comes to individual belief. And I've always been so curious about the Seventh day Adventist like denomination, because I was raised non denominational,
Uh-huh.
and we had different practices. Of course, like we celebrated holidays, except for Halloween, because demons ride Halloween decorations home from Party City, and
I'm in the process of making a Halloween wreath, and I did it to try and get somebody to buy it because they said that their sister loved it, and I was like, let me try and make something that's Halloweeny, but I'm like spiritually comfortable with it. I'll have to like show you.
like a harvest,
It's not all
like
glued together.
harvesting.
Well, there's like, I've got the basis is like black and yellow mesh, and then there's all these fall things, and I try to keep it away from the red and the brown because that's more fall Thanksgiving. And then I've got like
Mm.
black sparkly stuff, and then I was like, look, here's like a black sparkly spider that can sit on top of a yellow flower. That's Halloweenish. Spiders are real,
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And then pumpkins and things. Like you can get essences without going all the way. So anyway,
That's true. So like, but demons, you did say like you believe in angels and demons were real.
yes, and that's circling all the way back to like the Old Testament's rough and the killing and the apparent genocide, and then we went
Hmm.
to tangents, and
Oh yeah, that's
and I
right.
mentioned zombies, and we just went from there. But like,
That's true. Oh, the zombies.
oh, so, and then also we touched on it a little bit in the talking about like Noah and the flood and people hitting a point where they're irredeemable.
Hmm. Hmm.
And because at a certain point, like, I mean, for example, like they're rare, but they're real. Like, for example, like pedophiles.
Oh, so when you say demons, you don't mean like little like red like men with horns that like run around.
I
You mean
no,
like,
well, not that visual, no, and I don't mean people when I say demons.
oh,
But pedophiles are an example of people like it. When you become a pedophile, it's such a deep sickness. It's such a deep evil. Like
that's
there
awful.
there just have to be some immovable safety boundaries, and in some cases
I
further than that,
agree with
like
that.
hardcore punishment. Like there are certain things, and like with cancer, there's no cure for it yet, but everybody knows it's super serious, and cancer can hit a point where you just can't. You know,
Hmm.
they're not everywhere, but there are like inarguable examples of pathology that's reached a certain point that it can't be brought back.
Sure,
And it
sure.
can be like Hitler was once an innocent baby boy, and God only
He
knows
was.
exactly what led to where, and there's history, people who can analyze, but like he hit a certain point where he couldn't be brought back,
Hmm. I wonder
and
what that turning point was for him.
huh?
'Cause that's just, I said, I wonder what the turning point was for him because he was an aggressive person, like just the way, just putting it very, very,
And
very,
so
very
sick.
lightly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so sick.
incredible,
Unbelievably sick. And then the sickness that he
incredibly sick.
fostered and affirmed in others, just, I don't want to be willy-nilly and light with those examples, but there are examples that
Mhm,
that people inarguably accept of somebody who just like a medical condition or a person's brain that cannot be brought back.
mhm, sure.
And I'm not going to oversimplify it, because then there are people who do damage by oversimplifying and calling everything spiritual warfare, when you've got to look at all the facets. There's the mental health, there's the free will, there's the choice. Like with abusers, people like men who get off on abusing their wife and kids, it's not like
Mm,
they just have some disease.
that's so weird.
There's this book by Lundy Bancroft called Why Does He Do That? And he worked with abusive men and specialized. And he's like, these men, they act like they just lost control, but they show in all kinds of contexts that they are in control, but that they just decide at some point that they're just going
Why
to
does
be
he do
violent.
that?
They
I've
just,
never, they do decide at one point, but
and
what
even
is the,
and not just in like a whole arc of things, but like in certain moments. It's not just like, oh, I just lost control. No, they show throughout their life and in all kinds of contexts that they are in control, but they just at a
oh, they're in
certain point,
control.
they make an entitled decision because of how they've developed over time.
Why does he do that?
By Lundy
What a
Bancroft.
compelling title. Their title. Yeah, I'm. It's just why does he do that? I wonder if there's a why does she do that?
I don't know, but he did actually mention though that like, even though he's referring to the gender stereotypes of like male abusers and female victims, that these
Yeah,
dynamics are relevant in all gender identity, sexual orientation, relationship contexts, but that because
sure.
there's so much of it in a certain context, that's kind of like the pronouns that he sticks with. But he has like sections before and at the beginning and end of his book where he was like, these dynamics can exist anywhere, in all.
And I just find it, and it definitely can be. I just find it interesting that we automatically go towards the concept of men doing these things because they, and generally speaking, are the ones who are typically the abusers.
Mhm.
And I just find that very interesting. And if there's an evolutionary contribute or what the evolutionary contribution is to that, because I did my master's degree when I did my thesis, I did it on domestic violence, and
Really?
I did,
You and I need to talk
and
privately.
yeah, it's such an interesting topic, but I did it on the propensity of Black women versus white women to seek mental health care
Mm,
following intimate partner violent
mm,
episodes, pretty much.
mm,
And it's very intriguing, but it is typically men depicted that way. But I will say, since becoming more involved in the lesbian community,
mm,
I don't think I have talked to one because see, I like really feminine women.
mhm,
Um, I'm more masculine of center regarding like kind of wanting to be provider and protector. I'm just like that with my siblings, people I care about.
yeah,
And I don't want anybody to ever be responsible for my safety.
mm,
So I wouldn't date like a hard stud or like a masculine woman because I feel like that role she would assume would be that of someone, charged with being, provided with my safety. But like, excuse me, providing safety to me. But the lesbian community, I don't think I've dated a girl who hasn't dealt with abuse in the
mm,
lesbian community.
mm,
A lot of these women out here, but they do align with the masculine roles.
mm,
So I'm wondering if it has something to do with being more masculine in behavior, masculine in mentality, to where like those types of people in the relationships or in that relationship dynamic would be more physically abusive, kind of in like a maybe like with chimpanzees and other primates and other animals, it seems like the abuse is designed to try to keep the female close to
mm,
protect the female from the outside world, but not necessarily from the abuser,
mhm,
which I find really odd because if you can't protect her, she needs to go somewhere where
mhm,
she can be protected.
mhm,
Um, But I do find it interesting that it's the masculine roles that are typically charged with being the abusive ones in the relationships.
I think that just opens up a whole bunch of stuff in my brain. So as the Christian that I am, my beliefs are that, even though the Bible is full of male pronouns towards God, and that's what people say, that like God created masculinity and femininity, male and female, because he is neither male nor female, and men and women represent different aspects of who he is, and then he, designs us to blend in various ways because the union, the synergy represents something unique, about him. And then, of course, each of us individually are made in the image of God. And then there's a way in which he reveals himself through every individual that's fingerprint unique. And so there are lots of ways in which what the Eldridges teach would not fly in a lot of, current contexts, but they've been huge for me because they're survivors. They worked in counseling and such. And there's a lot that they helped me with, like before I had more support. I did a lot of work on myself by resources and books, and they gave me a lot of
Okay.
puzzle pieces that I still find helpful. And I also found them to be very authentic and real. I was coming out of like where there's a whole section of like the purity culture authors where like there's all this pendulum
Oh.
swinging, and
Mhm.
instead of pendulum swinging types, I felt like the Eldridges, and they had their ministry was called Ransomed Heart, now it's called Wild at Heart, and they are people, I experience them to this day as people who are just authentically on a journey, and they
Okay.
don't try to fake or hide or anything like that. They're just real, love them or hate them, hell or high water, they're, and also, and I respect it that like, the leader of the ministry, John Eldridge, he had an opportunity to take his ministry big, but he felt like it was important to stay small and authentic rather than just going big conglomerate. And I really respected that.
Like a mega church because, well, I mean, there's a
Or
lot
big
of
on TV or
money.
something. Big on TV. Just, he could have taken what he did as big, but they felt impressed to really follow the Holy Spirit and to just stay small and intimate and authentic. And I really respected that because you don't see that a lot.
No, especially well, I always say one of my family members is a megachurch pastor, and that prosperity gospel, it's very financially lucrative.
Oof.
But it is, I mean, it's a nice house. It's a very nice house, but I mean, it's very like fiscally lucrative. But I feel like I feel like it's incongruent with what the overall message is supposed to be, especially if you're going to follow the concept that Jesus promoted, which was humility and having a meek and private life and praying in your prayer closet.
Yeah.
And, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the, kingdom of heaven, which is interesting.
Well, and it's also like you have to think about how people back then treated their money, and there's something about that that's transcendently through to now. It's very rare that you will find people who relate to their money in a generous, godly, service-oriented way. And a lot of people will look like they're donating a lot, and they'll give a lot of visuals and lip service, but like, how are they really?
Oh, of course.
And all that. So,
but that's the goal. You want to give those heavy sacrificial, you want to provide that heavy sacrificial representation because that's how you ascend rank in the church. Because the goal is to do that. So you can get more power, more influence, and more like social benefits and resources. But you don't want to actually have to give all that money to do it.
And the thing is that like what you just described, that is how it is in so many systems and institutions, whether it's religious or political or whatever.
Absolutely.
And that, and that's like, and again, like that's what a lot of Christianity looks like. But then my literal brain goes off like, but that's not what Christianity is supposed to be. Like, that's not, that's like, part of my meltdown was like, we just need to be faithful to what the Bible actually says, faithful to what Ellen White actually wrote, clean the inside of the cup and dish, have priorities of prayer and taking care of people. And yet we're all so focused on image and this other. And then there was just a whole lot. It was like 43 minutes of just blowing my world open. But
like the idea of a female prophet. I kind of want to be one now. And start my own religion.
you should. Okay, so again, this is a Christian-based book, but it's also heavily trauma-informed by trauma experts. It's called Redeeming Heartache.
Okay.
And by Dan Allender and Kathy Lorzell, and they're talking about like a more garden variety of different kinds of traumas, not just because they also do focus on sexual abuse, but
Mm.
in talking about the different kinds of traumas that can shape us certain ways, they use certain biblical archetypes of orphan, prophet, and widow or widower. And then they talk about
Orphan
how the
prophet
healing
overlord.
turns into priest, prophet, and king or queen. And they're
King.
using symbolism and mixing that with psychology and trauma-informed teaching and stuff. And like,
Okay.
and then they mix that with like, it's really interesting. Dan Allender has this, I can tell he has this focus, and he weaves it with psychology about faith, hope, and love. He has another book where he was like, look, when you experience betrayal, then you experience a loss of faith, an assault on faith, and that produces doubt. And then that goes on long enough, and then you start to experience powerlessness, which assaults hope and leads to despair. And then that goes on
Mm.
long enough, and then you start to experience the splitting of ambivalence, which creates a loss of love in your life, which leads to disintegration. And he loves
Oh
alliteration.
my
You
gosh.
have like doubt, despair, disintegration, and then you have these
Yeah.
betrayal, which leading to powerlessness, which leads to ambivalence, which is like this feeling of like being split. Part of me wants to, part of me doesn't. Part of me is neutral,
Mm.
whatever. Part of me is like having a strong emotional reaction, just being fragmented. But in this more
Mm.
recent book, Redeeming Heartache, they talk about how like orphan, that's like the trauma shaping of stuff that happens when you're a kid, and it makes you and it assaults faith in the sense that you can't trust, care, or rest, and it only feels comfortable and safe to receive
Ooh.
what you can give yourself. But the healing of
Okay.
that is like priest, and they define priest as like somebody who gives care, somebody
Okay.
somebody who gives care.
Well,
um
ideally, in some
uh-huh.
cases, they don't give care.
Well, and this is like a symbolic term, not like religious priest, but like think of symbol, like like the priest in
Okay.
you, the prophet in you, the king or queen in you,
Okay.
thing.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so it's like think of it as like symbolic, and then like and then then there's the wound of stranger, where you go through these experiences that make you feel like you don't belong, and you're just out on your own, and then that can lead to like lots of bitterness and bitching and just being on the outside and rah. And then the healing of that is prophet, and prophets, and being a prophetic role, you don't really have a place in the palace or in the temple, so to speak. Prophets live on the outskirts. They're independent individuals, and they
Mm.
walk to speak to what is wrong. And they speak to wake people up, to make things
Yes.
better. So like
Sure.
MLK, prophet. He was
Mm.
a prophetic man, because he spoke truth to power, and he spoke to wake people up. Silence breakers. They're literally breaking silence, literally speaking truth to power, and that's also a prophetic type of voice. Um,
Okay.
and then like when you have the loss of love, that leads to when you and it's not just like when somebody dies, but any kind of loss of love in your life, it leads
Mhm.
to this isolation of like being a widow or widower, and there's this isolation that you're ensconced into, and the healing
Good
of that
point.
happens through like a rupture and repair. And then the whole thing about being, symbolically speaking, king or queen, is somebody who helps to order the kingdom, like a leadership role, somebody who helps to structure and order for the provision of everyone and everything.
Okay.
And so it's like,
That
this is
makes
very
sense.
symbolically speaking, and if you read it, like I think it'd become more clear. But like
Okay. Okay.
all of that from okay, so and all that to back up, you talked about you never really met somebody in the lesbian community who hadn't dealt with
Who
abuse,
hasn't?
and then you were talking about masculine, and then I went into all this.
Yes.
So something that the Eldridges believe and teach, that I still just I can't develop all my own processings of it, but it's like, masculinity is representing like, like the essence of that is strength, action. And then
Aggression.
yeah, and then with feminine, and it's not that like women don't have action and strength and whatever. And then with like the essence of femininity is beauty, and that's restfulness. So there's like rest and
Mm.
action, those two things together. And then
Right.
like and then you also think about how, like, they say like something just feels kind of wrong about seeing a man lying half naked with a sheet. Like something in you wants to tell him like, get up, get a job, do something, go be productive.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
not
also,
attractive. I'll say that.
and it's like, come on, like, don't be lazy, because you see, like, strength in action. And then,
Sure.
and then like, you know, when you, and I think that female empowerment, there's like, you know, like there's the woman in the Old Testament who like drove a tent peg through the head of this evil king.
That was my favorite. When I was in home, I was homeschooled, right? And I was homeschooled at a Christian school. Just a quick side tangent
Sure.
based on that verse. And I was told that for the yearbook, I had to select my favorite Bible verse, and and then they read it too at the like graduation party, and that was my verse. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. I love the idea of this woman doing that, because that's a more masculine behavior to kill like that.
Strength, you know, it's strength and boldness. And then there was Deborah. She was a judge and she led people into war.
Oh, I love Deborah.
And then there's just a lot of different roles.
Love that.
Yeah, and then also like gentleness isn't not masculine. Gentleness is a fruit of the Holy Spirit, and it's meant for everybody. Everybody's supposed to be able to be bold when necessary and be gentle as necessary, you know. And so like I don't think that it has as much to do with, I don't think the buck stops with masculinity and femininity. I think it goes down to strength and beauty, action and rest. And then when you have distortions of those, when you have like a distortion of strength, either there's passivity or there's abuse and aggression. When you have,
interesting.
So it's like, I know a lot of active aggressive abuse comes from that distortion where it's overdone and there's entitlement mixed in. Like you read it in that book, Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft, and you see a lot of exploration of like what this distortion of strength and how it gets mixed in with all these pathologies and entitlement and just sadism, whatever. Like, you know, what helps the guy feel in control, you know? And that's the other thing is that like there's, you know, there's control. And I think that a distortion of strength can be control, and a distortion of rest is like, you know, I don't want to use the word safety, but that's what's popping up. Like, you know, sometimes we go lax and we go passive and we hide because that are the only ways to feel safe. Like there are these, you know, there's these I'm trying to get centered in my screen, but you know, like,
no, you're good.
Yeah, there's these extremes. So like, I think it's deeper than masculinity and femininity. I think it's like, you know, when you have somebody who has qualities of strength, but maybe they're not integrated, then that can get with experience, trauma, pathology, and then that turns into like entitlement and aggression. And I have these temperament, innate qualities. And so some people, their innate qualities are such that they go extra passive to cope.
Yes.
They'll go extra aggressive to feel in control. Like sometimes it's passivity and hiding and withdrawing and curling up, you know, freeze. You know, there's the fawn, freeze, flight, you know, these
flight, freeze. Yeah. Or excuse me, fight, flight, freeze, and then freak. There we go. I'll just say, because I don't want to be disrespectful and regarding language.
No, it's you know, it's okay. Like I dropped plenty of F-bombs in my meltdown.
Oh, okay. Fight, flight, freeze, fuck. Okay.
No, it's all good. Again, I'm telling you, like it's like cruelty to animals or cruelty to anybody vulnerable, that will get my blood boiling.
Oh my gosh.
When I see selfishness or I see people not using resources that are available, that kind of stuff triggers me. But like language, like I mean I'm saying it now because I have to be in a certain mode to just get comfortable and start dropping F-bombs. But again, I'm not pretending. I have sworn I got in some hot water at a situation because like I was freshly traumatized, and it was at the beginning of that trauma last fall that derailed my plans. And it was the worst week of our lives, and I went seeking help, and I did use the F word when I was talking, and I was just a picture of intensity, shaking head to toe. But I didn't say, what effing good are you? I said, what effing good are we, the church? Like, if we can't help in situations like this. And then somehow that got turned into and then somehow it got distorted. And then I found out later, like the chair of that department called my husband in, who works IT at the university, and said, this can't happen.
Tell on you or something?
No, well, apparently, like afterwards, she called campus safety as if I were some sort of threat.
Because you said the F word, so she called campus safety.
The person I was talking to, somehow the miscommunication occurred that they thought I said, well, if you can't help me, what effing good are you? And I did not say that, and my husband witnessed that.
Even if you did.
but I didn't, and also that's against my
Right.
values to talk to a person that way. Um,
Sure.
but I was saying, like, if we, the church, can't help in situations like this, what effing good are we? Higher,
Yeah.
but still, like, and then other things were factors. And then I've tried to reach out because it's like clearly miscommunication happened, and this happened in the communications department at Andrews University with communications professors, and it's like, this is a communication issue. And like,
Not the
and
best at
well,
communication. They are.
and I mean, like, I was there feeling vulnerable and humiliated on one of the worst days of my life, and then I find out later that, like, you treated me like a danger, and then talked to my husband like he needs to keep me away from there.
Like
And then,
he's your parent, like your father or something.
or just like your wife is a loose cannon, this can't happen again, keep her away, whatever,
That
anyway.
is ridiculous.
And that was also upsetting to me because this, like, there's my denomination, and then my university is kind of a different category. And I was like, and the original slogan of Andrews used to be "Seek knowledge, affirm faith, change the world," and now they've changed it to simply "World changers made here." And I'm like, okay, so you know what? A little of the world came to Andrews that day, and then this is what happened. And I'm like trying to get a meeting, and they're not having it, and it's just very sad. And I don't know exactly how I'll deal with that at some point. But it's just like, this is an example of, like, it shouldn't be that way with professed Christians, especially people who study and teach communications, because this was a communication issue. And
Right.
there was no violence or aggression. There was nothing broken. There was nothing like that. And I was like, at the end of that meeting, when I realized that I had, humiliated myself and my sister over what had just happened in there, I remember feeling cold and slumping. And then, like,
Oh
we were just
no.
gonna leave, and then the person I was talking to, I guess, felt bad that she couldn't help us. She was like, "Well, let me pray with you. I believe in prayer." And then we find out later that she talks to the chair, and all this stuff happens. And then the first thing out of my sister's mouth is, "She prayed with us."
And right. That's
The thing is,
hypocritical.
and the thing is that I don't know what she said to the chair that led the chair to do that. That's what I'm saying. This is a communication issue.
Yeah.
But they won't.
That's
But right now they won't meet with me. And I even went to, like, the president of the university and tried, and she heard me, and she was kind, and that was therapeutic, and I felt heard by her. I finally heard that, like, she did reach out to them, but they're still, like, suggesting that they talk with me, meet with me for my closure, but that they're still, like, not budging. So it's not my top priority right now. But, like, things like that, like you say, this is a university. We're all about higher education and being intellectual
sure.
and going through issues. This is communications of a Christian.
Sure. And they were really having issues with that.
And I'm an alumni. I graduated from there. I had a minor in communications. Like,
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Former chair, who's like a legend. Okay. Like I just got attached to her, and she was my advisor just because I really admired her, not because she's a legend. But then I realized later she's like a legend. But, like,
there you go.
but I'm not trying to wield anything. But it's like, I had attachments there. I was impacted there. I loved communications, and I was just, and I went there looking for, attempting the help that I was attempting based on, like, how this person represented their website, and videos that they posted on Instagram a certain way. And I was like, let me just try here. And then when it seemed like this humiliating, pointless exercise, we were just going to leave. And then she's like, well, let me pray with you. And then she was late to a live TV interview, and this communication, they're just like, this can't happen again. And I'm like, oh my word, I didn't pressure. We weren't in there for very long. And she's an adult, and she knew her schedule. And then we could have just left right then, but she wanted to pray with us. It's not our fault she was late, and nobody forced anything. But anyway, and, like, moments like, that's like a G-rated tiny little moment of, like, that was an inconsistency between what you do and how you live. And then it gets worse than that, and I don't, and this kind of cycles back to, like, experience being a big part of me being a Christian still, because my personal spiritual life, my experiences with God, I've experienced passive suicidality 3 times in my life. I've been through, I finally started to learn what trauma and PTSD was. Thank you. Because I went through heartbreaks that were so big that it made me feel unrecognizable to myself in my own body. And that scared the hell out of me. And I started Googling, and that's when I started learning about PTSD back in 2011. And it's just continued. I'm working on recovering from an eating disorder that was brought on by the trauma that I experienced as a pastor's wife, and not just
Sure.
that first story, but also like when I tried to go to the other avenues, the higher ups and the other independent places where they marketed themselves as caring about abuse, and then there was just re-traumatization.
Mm.
And
That's not good. That
well,
deceptiveness doesn't help, or deceit doesn't help.
well, and it's also finding out, like, there was that day, like I told you, when I called my professor and mentor and I was like, does this really happen? And she's like, I'm so sorry. Yes, it does. And that was bad enough
Mm.
then. But then, like, trying to get help, because, like, again, I'm having this literal brain allergic reaction of like, these are church leaders and this is sin. This isn't true. They lied about us.
Oh
This
yeah.
is not right. Like the Bible, I was raised and I love Sabbath school and I love the Bible and I believe what the Bible says, and this is wrong. This is sin. And these are evil people
Mm.
who shouldn't be here and we should go, and all this, that, and the other. And
So when somebody sins in the Seventh Day Adventist religion, is that like you repent and then God absolves, or what does one do to kind of, I guess reconcile? I guess I'll use that word again.
sure. And like, but real quick to tie up, like, it was just this shock of like, I believe the Bible and I still believe in God, but the church,
Mm.
even the leadership,
Oh, the church,
was
yeah.
like not being faithful to everything they
No.
taught me to believe and that I still believe. And then you mentioned
Yeah.
like, okay, sinning and repenting. Um,
Yes.
so the question that you asked, it sounded like, it sounded to me like a technical question, like what are the technicalities? Because, and that made me,
Yes.
and not just think that there's something that you've seen and heard of, but I know that like there are so much about organized Christianity today takes
Yes.
these things and reduces them into like these technical processes and exchanges.
Okay.
And I mean,
That's yeah.
but I'm disagreeing with that. So and then
Mm.
sin is something that I've looked into a lot, because there's also a lot of communication issues that create damage around how we communicate about and understand sin. Um,
Mm. Okay.
Sin is, you know, one of the best. It's not a Greek or Hebrew thing, but I think it matches up with the Greek or Hebrew. A definition of sin that I heard is separation from God. And
Yes.
so,
Yeah.
like,
That's how I was raised as well.
until I heard that definition, and especially purity culture didn't help. There's always, and the way that people preach in sermons, sin is this yucky, ewy, sin, like it's just
Right. Right.
got this connotation of just defilement, and all this other
Right.
drama,
Pearl clutching.
yeah, like whoa,
Yeah.
and then I think of, and sin. There's sin is, you think about carbon monoxide. You
Mm.
can't smell it, you can't see it, but it can slowly
Mm.
kill you.
That's
That's
true.
that's not all sin, but like we need to remember that. And so with that thing of separation from God, and then the Hebrew and Greek, it's like to miss the mark. And then it's like,
Mm.
oh my goodness, like, you're not perfect, you're not performing. But then, and then the way that I work this out is that in John 17, when Jesus was praying and talking to the Father before it became time for Gethsemane and the crucifixion and all that,
Crucifixion.
he was
Hmm.
his prayer was for union between God and his people, not
Mm.
perfect performance thing, but like, I pray that they would be one as you and
Mm.
I are
Okay.
one. And I have made you known and will continue to make you known, so that the love that you have for me may be in them, and so that I myself may be in them. And and
Okay.
and it's this mutual indwelling and this union of relationship
Hmm.
that is cultivated through experience and trust and faith. It's not, there's all these there's so much to do with so many ways that people practice religion and faith, that it's like this technical exchange. You do this and then God does that. And
Right.
and it's like, sin is like, look at relational dynamics. So there are things that we can do in a relationship, and um that can enhance or inhibit the intimacy in that relationship.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
and there are things that can inhibit or enhance the intimacy in a relationship that aren't necessarily like the end of the world. Oh, gross. But
Right.
there are these little moments, these little choices that can either enhance or inhibit the intimacy of a relationship. Now, that's at the nucleus, at the core of sin and everything else. Like, so like you can, like for example, in a relationship, like if a husband beats and rapes his wife, that's like a really big version of something that will inhibit, the
Yeah.
intimacy of the safe, healthy intimacy of a relationship. But then
Oh
also
my
like,
gosh.
but then also if you take it down really small, like, if there's a fight between friends or a married couple or whatever, and then at the end of it you try to say I love you and the person deliberately doesn't say it back as they head out the door and shut the
Right.
door, it's not as
Right.
severe, but that's also going to something. And
Yeah.
examples of what can inhibit intimacy, they can get smaller and smaller and more micro. And
Mm.
so by looking at that as the core of sin, it covers all sorts of things across the spectrum. It also makes sin easier to talk about, because
Mm.
I think that it takes away stigma in an important way. Not because I want to be a pansy about sin, because then there's the folks who are all like, oh, there's the lax church who doesn't care about sin and holiness, whatever. And I'm not trying to be lax, but it's like, let's do everything we can to bring things into focus, to have
Mm.
real workable definitions, so that genuine productive conversations can be had that will actually
Agreed.
help, that will actually solve things, that can help people feel valuable throughout the conversation, no matter how difficult the topic.
Hmm.
So like in Seventh-day Adventist Church, um, Seventh-day Adventist Church, when it comes to sin, repentance, and restoration of relationship, it's um, there's it's not about some technical exchange like in the Catholic Church, where it's like you go to confession or you do this, or like back in the Middle Ages where it's like you pay some money and you're absolved. It's not a technical exchange
Right.
like that.
Paying
It's
money. I would be poor if I had to pay every time I sin. I
all
have
wood.
no money. You're right.
And it's like, so there's, my brain wants to go to Bible places, and then there's this book Ellen White wrote towards the end of her life called Steps to Christ, and it's a tiny little book.
Mm.
And then one of the
Okay.
longest chapters in there is a chapter on repentance. And so especially looking at it through this relational lens, there are two definitions that I think are really helpful for repentance. One of them, it's the Greek metanoia, which means to change the way that you think. Like you can
Okay.
have somebody switch from Democrat to Republican, but they're the same antagonistic person. They've just switched the content because they have
Right.
not changed the way that they think.
Right.
They
Right.
have not become a different person.
Mm.
And like somebody described it like this. My dad's the exact same person. He went from being angry about the law to being angry about grace. Like it's repentance is to change the way that you think. And then the way that Ellen White
Right.
comes in on it and looking at different Bible passages, I think repentance is, it's not like penance, like, oh, I'm scared of the consequences, or like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble. Repentance
Right.
is a love-based sadness about
Hmm.
loss of
Love-based
intimacy and
sadness.
connection, a love-based sadness about the loss of intimacy and connection and the hurt that was caused to the relationship with God, the relationship with the person that the sin caused.
Okay. Okay.
And that's
So
just
how would one
And
like
that's just healthy
do they
psychology. Like if you value the person and if you're a decent human being, and then you
right.
realize that you've done something that hurts a relationship you care about, or that hurts any person, you're
You have to
supposed
make
to feel,
amends.
you're supposed to feel something, and to
Right.
feel sorry for the damage that it did, not anxious that you got caught.
Right.
You're supposed
So
to
in the
feel.
in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, for example, my mom would say, I need to repent. And we did talk about technicalities.
Mhm.
But how does one make it to heaven? I guess that's the question I'm asking. How
Okay.
does one make it to heaven in Seventh-day Adventist Church?
um So it's not strictly by being Seventh-day Adventist, and I'll say that right there, because like there's going to be all sorts of people, different denominations, and no faith at all,
Oh,
that we will be surprised
really?
by seeing in heaven. Yes,
So
I
what is the parallel? Just a belief in Christ or
I believe so. What the way that I will phrase it is that based on I believe that God looks, and not just what I believe, but like I can't regurgitate all the studies and whatever. But this is what I'll tell you what I believe based on all the studies. So I'm not able, and I'm not going to try and regurgitate everything that's led to this. But God,
okay.
Jesus, through a lens of love, but then also trying to reconcile everything, looks at people's lives, judges their cases, their hearts, their life stories based on about the best they did with the best they had.
Oh, okay. So
And
I could make it to heaven. You're about to eat something. You stopped immediately. That was so funny. You're like, you're like, I don't know about that. I always joke and say that I would rather not be, because if I feel like if my family is in heaven, I would.
not want to
Oh
be
my
there.
gosh, no, my gracious, are you serious? I would swan dive into hell. I would do, like when you watch like diving and they do like the whole like all the flips in the air, and I would be like,
Here I go with the flourish.
You said what?
Here I go with the flourish.
The flourish, yes. I would do a triple sow cow. I would just be, yes, like, but
Well,
I asked that kind of facetiously, not necessarily, well, maybe semi facetiously.
so heaven is a place of where there is no sin, in the sense that there is no separation from God. There
Right.
is union, and you have that by, you can't develop that intimacy without shared values to some extent.
Mm.
And I mean,
Yeah.
but here's the thing is that like, like, I don't think you can have somebody who believes in cruelty to animals and somebody who's anti-cruelty to animals and have them have an intimate relationship.
I don't know how one could believe in cruelty to animals. Like what, like spanking an animal if they
Well, I
misbehave?
mean cruelty to animals, like torturing, throwing an animal across the room, like cruelty to animals, literally. Like, there are certain, like, you could probably have a married couple who's, I think you could more sooner have a married couple where there's Democrat, Republican spouses than you could somebody who is pro cruelty and anti cruelty.
How
Who
could someone
basically is
be
like
pro cruelty?
somebody
Are they?
who's comfortable with devaluing other creatures and people how it suits
Yeah.
them, and then somebody who believes in valuing people.
That's just so weird. Like pro cruelty to, like, it's just, I feel like pro cruelty. I guess engaging in cruelty would be pro cruelty. I guess that's what you're saying.
I mean, just in the sense that like you're just comfortable with being with causing pain.
Oh no. Yeah,
Because
that would not work.
I've looked at the definition of cruelty, and it can be intentional and it can all just be like callous. I don't care if you're telling me I'm hurting you.
Mm.
I don't care. It's not just about, I see people, I'm actually working on a post for a while where
Savagery.
like somebody was like, well, like I wasn't trying to be unkind. It's not fair to call me cruel. But if you look at what cruelty actually means, it's not just about trying to be unkind or trying to inflict pain. It's also not
It's,
caring whether or not you do, not caring when somebody lets you know that you have.
it says almost to, well, it says callous indifference to or pleasure in causing pain and suffering.
Yeah, you're like, yeah.
Interesting.
Basically, it's like
Ferocity.
this distorted relationship with suffering, period. Because it's
Okay.
distorted to find pleasure in causing suffering, and it's distorted to just not care about it and be unmoved by it.
Okay. I'm looking.
So,
That's so interesting.
and so, like I, and I'm not going to try and be a shrink or get inside your head, nothing like that. But like I saw that you posted something about you having to hear or read out loud a psalm while a sibling was being beaten, something
Hmm.
along those lines. And
Yeah. Psalm 119. When my sister was being like unendingly spanked, and there was like all this screaming. It was. I'll never forget it. It was like the craziest shit ever.
and
We had to sit in the hallway and just read, and my mom was praying. It was. My family is so fucking weird. Like people just don't believe it. Like Christians are so put off by it. It's wild.
well, and I mean, and the thing is that there's like I think it's oh man, and that stuff and worse, it happens, and people use faith and they use the Bible for those ugly scenarios. It's
Hmm.
and I'm not even going to try and palliate or soften that. I mean, it's just and like you I think that your reaction to that and reaction to all kinds of other things that you've explored is understandable
Mm,
and valid because you're reacting
yes.
to dysfunction, abuse, and harm. You're reacting, you know, and you've made choices in relationship to like, well, God's supposed to be love, but then I'm seeing this in followers of Him, and then I am, you know, seeing this in the Bible that doesn't make sense. Like, you know, I think that you are having very valid and understandable, rational reactions to, you know, what it has been, how it's been represented to you. I think
Yes.
and I think and like healthy. It's healthy to be like, well, if this is what this means, well, fuck this. And there we go.
Oh, absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
no, it's like I'm sorry,
There's
but
your F-bomb.
no, no, I'm sorry, but it's like, well, like I mean, if this is what it does to people, and if this is what it means, if this means that this is how it's okay to treat people,
That's the
why?
point.
How is
And
that healthy? How is that good? How is that loving? Like I see that, you know, in you. And yes, like religion has victimized countless kids. Like you had a tweet about that. And I mean, there,
yeah,
you know, the people who are like really people of character and truly care about abuse in the church. Because what I realize, you know, is that like I think, you know, I think that a lot of church people feel like caring about abuse in the church is some sort of secular intruding issue on the work. But really, it's a sin issue. And it's a sin issue of like a really concentrated, damaging, intense sin that is causing harm. And the harm is so extreme that people who haven't experienced it say, like, well, I find that hard to believe. But you know what? You know who says it first is the people that it's happening to. They're like, I can't believe this is happening. And I've been there where like something unthinkable is taking place and it's so
yes.
real. The first person who finds it hard to believe is the person that it's happening to. But that doesn't make it any
Oh,
less
absolutely.
like
No.
there's a ton of languages in the world, there's a ton of cultures, and you may find it hard to believe that people live that way or that this language exists, but that's just because you haven't learned it yet. You haven't been there yet. And then it's the
Yeah.
same with
Oh, that's
these
a good point.
experiences. And this stuff is real and it happens way too often, and it's you know, and then there's some people who, you know, can get defensive like, well, that's not everybody. And I'm like, sure, it's not everybody, but it's too many.
Exactly. I would say in a
Too
lot of
many.
cases, one is too many, especially with
Yes,
things like
yes,
animal cruelty or
yes. One
like
is too
the
many.
whole one is too many. Yes. But like, yeah, those experiences, like I did not have a good relationship with religion growing up. It's shocking to me that I'm the only non-believer in my family. I just, it's really confusing how there aren't more because it was just so negative. And everything every day was centered on Christianity, reading the Bible every day. If you did something wrong, the lesson taught wasn't about how to be a better person, but how it was a sin against God and not necessarily how to improve yourself and how others view you. So it was just kind of, it just
I
was unfortunate. I'll say that.
and so I would argue that, you know, being so, and again, this is my literal brain of like, I would argue that it wasn't centered on Christianity as opposed to like what Christianity
Mm,
is, but that it was centered on how Christianity was distorted into a system of control that the
mm,
people in authority and power in your family embraced and believed in. And that's how they wanted to make their family work. That's how they wanted to keep order. Because
yeah.
actual Christianity, which is rare to be fully lived out and practiced and embodied. Because I mean, I think it was G.K. Chesterton who was like, it's not that Christianity has been um uh okay, I can't remember the first half, but it was like it's been tried and found difficult.
Yeah.
It's been tried and found difficult because like I mentioned earlier about like math and how everything in the Bible needs to be integrous and it needs to boil down to God is love. And
Right.
of course, like, you know, then there's like, you need to look at God's definition of love. Um,
Mm,
you know, and um like is he living integrous with his definition of love and how he defines it?
right.
And so like,
That's a good question.
you know how like in there are certain kinds of math problems, I think there's like you know how like there's like x squared plus 2x plus this, and then you multiply something by it, and then you have
Mm,
to like get the answers underneath, and it has to match up. And then
yep.
you do the problem backwards and forwards to check your work and make sure you did it right.
Yep.
So there everywhere that love is talked about, specifically, like there's a big definition of it in 1 Corinthians 13 and in and I think it's Romans 12. And then there's like a passage I think that you would love, actually, in John first, not John 3:16, although there is that, but First John 3. Hold on a minute. And I posted about this when I was a pastor's wife in reference to like the horrible stuff that was happening in Mexico, or like the Mexican border or something. And then and it's like, so here, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters, not beat them with the Bible and whatever else. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth.
I do remember that verse.
Practical help. Like, how can you stand by and see things and not do and not give and not try to help? Like, how can, like, that's, and there's, things like that. And there's something I was working towards with that. There's many ways in which little bits. The math thing, and then working it all out. So there's all the different places that flesh out what the full picture of love really means, according to all the biblical definitions of love put together. And then it's like there's like a math proof. Like, this is what biblical love means. This is what love is supposed to be. And so if there's an interpretation of something that doesn't match with this, then we did the problem wrong. We did the logical interpretation wrong. So then, like, back to numbers and the seeming genocide, and we skip popped into zombies a few times and other things,
right?
And the whole talk about like people and whatever hitting an irredeemable point. And yes, I believe in angels and demons, and no, it's not like little red creatures and pitchforks and horns.
Okay. How would you define or describe a demon?
I mean, it's an angel that has joined Satan's side. And so it's somebody that has the supernatural power that angels have, but uses it for evil.
What do they look like?
That's, I don't know that scripture ever gives descriptions of what a demon looks like, but scripture has given descriptions of angels. And then there are different people who have, so there's my chosen sister and there's my best friend. My best friend is like a prayer therapist and deliverance minister. And she was raised believing, in warfare. So she was raised where she has, she'll talk about having seen, the three of us, so that could be quite a talk. But she is such an interesting person, but like, it's not, there can be these presences of darkness, something shadowy, wispy, and also something that has a certain experiential effect of like, just hopelessness, the life being sucked out of you, darkness, fear, it has a negative impact. And it's not, these are just stories that I've heard. But anyway, so the reason why there are certain people that God told the Israelites to wipe out. And first of all, there's this phrase, men, women, and children. That one I want to address really quick because studying that, so we have the phrase break a leg. There are phrases in different languages, and there's a phrase, and it has a meaning, but not literal. But it has a meaning. Like, you're about to go on stage.
Like an idiomatic phrase.
Do a good job.
Yeah, an idiomatic phrase. Yeah.
Yes. And so the men, women, and children was an idiomatic phrase for total military victory.
Yeah, I can imagine, but it's troublesome though.
For sure, not denying that at all. But also like it's troublesome to us because we're hundreds and thousands of years later. But break a leg isn't troublesome to us now because it's something that we use in the culture that we're in. And that phrase break a leg would probably be troublesome to people like earlier on, like people in different contexts. They're idiomatic phrases that need to be translated and understood.
That's true.
But then I know that also it's like, okay, kill everybody but save the virgins. So
there, I was going to mention that.
yeah. And so I'll speak to what I know. And so like, I studied into like what the lifestyle and spiritual practices were of these people, and they worshipped through ritualistic sexual abuse. They killed children.
Ritualistic sexual abuse? How do you mean?
Gang rapes. Gang rapes, child sacrifice. it
Who
was
did,
it was it was abusive, horrific stuff.
like,
And
okay. I've never
that
heard of ritualistic sexual, like, I've never heard of sexual abuse used for religious reason, like
oh,
specifically to worship.
you should research that. There's there's
I
there's
mean, I
been a
believe it could happen, but
oh, there's been a lot of that throughout time, and that was a thing. And then there was, from what I studied, it's like, because there was a lot of spiritual initiation into this demonic worship and demonic takeover,
okay.
and sex, sexual activity and sexual abuse was a way for that to occur. And if you get a certain point where, like, you're just taken over by it, it's like that I understand it as that metaphor of, the zombies, where it's like the person isn't there anymore, and by their own
Hmm.
choices, or by this and that and the other. And then sometimes they're and I think, and real quick, like, okay, well, somebody was raped, that doesn't mean that she's irredeemable and she chose it. Okay, so there's like the initial thing, and then there's times where people, they do everything they can to break the cycle, to get out, to heal, and then some people decide to just stay. It's horrible, and it's not their fault
Hmm.
that they got there, but sometimes people make the decision to just embrace and stay, even if they hate it, but they just
Yeah.
make, decisions. And I've talked and I've listened to people who, like, do what they can to, like, work with sex workers, with trafficked people, prostitutes. And some
Oh
people,
gosh.
they want to come out and they do the work to come out, and then some people, they're stuck, and everyone and people are trying. And I'm not saying this
Mhm.
is everybody at all. But there are some difficult, rare cases where sometimes people just get stuck there, and you do
Yeah.
everything you can, and
Yeah.
something is just, and sometimes people just get trapped, and they won't come out. And so when you add
Yeah.
in that spiritual layer, and you add in, like, they're worshiping deities that, like, bathe in blood, and they're throwing kids alive into fiery furnaces, or impaling children, and doing all these, and then ritualistic sexual abuse and such, and all kinds of other really unspeakable violence that we would have huge problems with. It's understandable then that, like,
Didn't Yahweh do that?
huh?
Didn't Yahweh do that when he sent the Egyptian, or we sent the angel of death to kill those young children? And when he sent Moses and his tribe to kill the kids there, I mean, he wasn't, and then he, of course, with, I think it was Jephthah, who wanted to win a war. And he said, I'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my house. And he knew it was going to be his daughter. So that was child sacrifice.
Well, he didn't
And
know
then
it was going to be his daughter. And
God
then,
did, though.
well, but also, just because he said that didn't mean that he actually had to. So there's stuff
What do
to
you,
unpack. There's stuff to unpack in those stories. Like, he made that choice, but he didn't have to do that, and God
yeah,
wouldn't
but
want. God
God didn't
wouldn't.
have to sacrifice that girl either. I
Well,
mean,
I
God
mean,
already knew.
but God didn't make him do that, and God didn't ask him to make that promise, and
But
he had
God
a
still made the ultimate choice to do it. Just like God, God, when, okay, so when Jephthah he offered the first thing that came out of his house, God knew it would be his daughter, and God knew that he would end up, like, that child would end up sacrificed. So he could have made the choice to not do that, or it could have been like a dog or something that came out. I mean, God bless the
And I think
dogs,
that's
but
what the man was expecting. He wasn't expecting it to be his daughter. But there's also the fact about the man had choices, and the man could have reconnected, reevaluated. Like,
yeah,
there's
but
all kinds of no, but that's what
though.
I know, and I'm saying that was the father's choice, because there's places where, like, Abraham wrestled with God, like, just, okay, like 50 people, 40 people, 30
Jacob.
people, 12, 10, and then there were times when
Oh,
people
no, that
who
was Lot, wasn't it?
no, there was Abraham. No, that was Abraham, and then Lot was, like, one of the only people. But it was Abraham.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, Lot was
So,
the,
like, and
even though
also
he
there's times
also
that
wanted
Moses
his
went to the
daughters to
mat,
be
and then
raped.
there's also times that Moses went to the mat with God, like, hey, let's talk about this here. Like, there are
Those
people.
people are horrible representations of what, and that's that actually to your point. Abraham, Lot, and Moses are horrible representations of what a man or a leader should be. Abraham taking his son to the top of the mountain to sacrifice him, even though God's popped up and said no. And then Lot,
Well,
who
I mean,
was
but he
going to
didn't
offer
sacrifice
his,
his son.
he was going to, but God, he okay, so he was going to do it, which means that he knew that Yahweh was accepting of child sacrifice. Because if he knew, because if Yahweh wasn't accepted of child sacrifice and he was hearing a voice telling him to sacrifice his child, the only response would have been, "Be gone from me, demon. I know that you're not Yahweh," because Yahweh wouldn't be accepting of this. And
So
then Lot, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
no, it's okay. So real quick though, and we'll get back into this, but to finish up the thing earlier though about like, like the genocide thing in Numbers and going into all that, because then we dovetailed over into like child sacrifice. If we saw people being cruel like that and being horrific like that, we would want to also put a stop to it. And those
Sure,
people
but
who were doing those practices,
those
they had
children.
a point of there was a season of God trying to work with them, and there was a season of probation where the cup, symbolically speaking, the cup of wrath, wasn't there yet. Like people, like, let's say that there's like an abusive relationship or relationship that's becoming abusive. Then
Yeah.
you care about the relationship, so you try to make it work. You try to get help. You try to do the things that can help the relationship turn around. And then if everybody's willing, then it can turn around. And then if not everybody's willing, then eventually the relationship has to end. And then if we're looking at a situation that has all this horrific violence and all this harm that's being done, then in my mind it makes sense that a God of love would say, this has to stop. I've tried. They're refusing. So save people who have not been like lost and stuck and ruined in this life, so that they can have a
But he
second
didn't.
chance. And then yes, these other people who will not turn away from these horrible practices, they need to go.
But the male children though, like a
You're going
1-year-old
back to
male
Exodus,
baby.
God killing the firstborns.
No, this is for the proclamation that Moses gave for the Israelites to go and take out, I believe, the Malachites, and like saying, kill everyone except the girls who haven't known a man. The male children didn't have anything to do with that, and that's kind of my point. Like, I know that the most common apologetics for these situations is that, well, those people were just so bad, God couldn't do anything with them.
But
But we're
children.
talking about kids. Yeah, like that's a problem. And
So
that's a God who's okay with wiping out those children.
will you text me? I know we're on live right now, but do you mind? And this is not like, oh, I'm going to be all defensive, but like, I want to study this more. Will you text me that passage? Because I'm more familiar with
Sure.
New and Old Testaments. And I've studied certain parts. And so I'd like to, look more into this, talk with some, I have a friend of mine, she and I are bridesmaids in each other's weddings, and she's an Old Testament professor. She's the one who
Sure.
handed me the book about Is God a Moral Monster? Because yes, like, how do we reconcile that Jesus in the New Testament said it's better to have a millstone around your neck and you be thrown into the sea and forcibly drowned than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. Like, that's a really strong statement on behalf
Yeah.
of protecting the vulnerable, protecting children. And
Yeah.
then it's hard to reconcile. Like, how do we reconcile God represented by his son who says that about protecting kids, and then these verses that seem to say this about, well, screw the kids. And so
Yes.
that's a study. That's a study.
Numbers 31:18. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Judges 21:11. Oh, maybe he said it twice. It's looking like he may have said it twice.
Well, and
Judges
one thing I can
21.
more easily speak to about like the plagues and the plagues and then killing the firstborn is that up until that point, God had been saying, like, just let my people go. He'd been
Let
saying
my
to
people
Pharaoh,
go.
let my people go. And he
I
said no
know.
and refused. And then he made things harder and more abusive. And then God started with
But
mild.
he made his heart harder, though.
Well, I know that the text says that, like, he just made that, but then and again, this is, I know, an analogy, but I struggled with that, and then what I learned and what I was taught, and this makes sense to me, especially if we're like trying to do the math problem right. How does this boil down to God being love? You know,
Yeah.
so if you look at different substances, if you like, the impact of the sun on clay and on wax is different. The substance of the
Sure.
heart, who the person is. The sun is just being the sun. The sun is just being consistent. But it will
Okay.
make clay hard because that's the substance of the person. And it will
Okay.
make wax melt because that's the substance of wax. And that's how it interacts with the sun, just being the sun in both situations. And
Okay.
so I have been taught that, like, and it makes sense to me that, like, oh, and God hardened his heart. It's like, well, the sun hardens clay, but the sun melts wax. And it's about who you are when God is just being God. And and also he was like, just let my people go. Like, they've been slaves here. They've been enslaved and abused for hundreds of years. Let them go so they can worship me in the wilderness. We're
And
starting there.
then make a molten calf, and then he opens up a Sarlacc pit
Oh,
and draws.
but that's way later, like that led to, like, there's
Sure.
detail and context, that matters. Like,
Oh no, it is. I just tend to
because like
an
MLK
all
cheated on his
powerful.
wife. MLK cheated on his wife, and somebody could like want to bring that up and say that discredits everything he did. But that's like
They do.
but there's a context to that, and that doesn't discredit everything that he did. It's like
No,
there's
it
that people
doesn't.
do, but like,
I mean, he was famous. What famous man hasn't cheated on his wife?
well,
I mean, I would be shocked. But we definitely, there's definitely more conversation that we need to
I know
have.
2 hours.
I know, but it was great though. It's so easy to talk to you. So it's like time is just going. But if you don't mind, yeah, we can definitely wrap up. If you want to shout out your
Did
Twitter.
you send me those Bible verses to study?
You know what?
But also, like, I just wanted to wrap up. You were mentioning, like, real quick, like, God gave Pharaoh choices, and he was like, look, if you don't do this, then there's going to be this plague. So he told him what was going to happen and gave him a choice. And then
he did.
And then the plague happened. And these were like but these were non-lethal plagues. And there was a progression to them.
Well, they were non-lethal as far as not killing humans, but
really the choice was Pharaoh's, because God let him know again and again and again and again. I'm asking you for something basic. Let my people go. And if you don't, then there's going to be this non-lethal but unpleasant but supernatural plague that's going to happen. I'm serious. I'm real. What I'm saying is true. I'm giving you chances. I'm saying over and over and over again, let my people go. And Pharaoh knew that God was powerful. He knew he was real. And he kept, like, no. And then even after his son died and that loosened him for a bit, then he just went back to being himself. And he's like, you know what? No. And, so there's the context.
I know, he killed that boy. Like, God has this thing about killing children. I feel you. I got you. But I can't, I'm not going to give Yahweh slack on killing kids.
That's like, okay. And that's and that is a very important study that I want to look more into, because, like, sure, I have my faith, and there's a lot that's experiential in spite of trauma that I've been through, and not just and before institutional, there was still like relational harm from professed Christians, and people, and I can't say everyone is just professed. Like, people are imperfect and they have their struggles, and it doesn't mean that everything about the relationship with God is crap.
Right. That's true.
I had and still have and continue to have, reasons of experiencing the evil in this world, experiencing harm, and seeing inconsistency and seeing lack of character. And it's not like emotional biochemicals at worship services with good music. That's sort of how it started. But even then, it's different, and that we can get into that more later. But like, I have my faith, and my faith, in spite of everything, is there. But it's also strong enough that, like, that's a valid question. That's a struggle. I want to look at that. So send me like, and it's not because, like, I can just give you the da-da-da. I don't know how to answer the questions you'd like them answered. So send me verses, and I'm going to talk to people, and then we'll just talk.
Oh, absolutely. I just texted you 2 of them, Judges 21:11 and Numbers 31:18, because I had to look them up as well.
Sure.
But it looks like it happened twice.
Send me anything and everything, and who knows, maybe we could have like a staple conversation of like, here's where I'm at on this thing that you threw at me.
That would be awesome, because I do love these conversations, and it is fun to talk about this topic. I mean, religion is so intriguing, and I really want like a PhD in theology or something, because I find it to be, I want to teach, I want to lecture. But
how people make meaning, and how it leads to these inexplicably deep motivations and things.
Oh, absolutely. But the psychological, anthropological, sociological, ethological contributions to religious belief, and why it persists and is so pervasive and ubiquitous despite how science has progressed. I mean, even in like the Western world, it is decreasing, but it still persists even in other forms. It seems like now it's more political belief and alignment that's taking kind of the place of religious zealotry. So it's just kind of, it's such an interesting thing to me. But I definitely need to have you on the show again, because it's just, this was a really good show. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I sort of invited myself, kind of.
Well, I still appreciate it regardless.
Well, and thank you. And I really enjoyed it because I just remember there was this, so last night we watched this movie that was, it was really excellently acted, made a lot of good points, and also massively triggering in other ways for me. But like there was, it's called The Whale. It's a recent movie that came out. Brendan Fraser.
Oh, I couldn't finish that.
Oh my word.
I couldn't finish it.
Oh my word. But like Sadie Sink, the redhead, new up and coming actress, she has this line where she was like, the thing I don't
The
get,
daughter.
like, yeah. She's like, they the thing I don't like about religion, something along the lines of like, they convince people that they're stupid sinners, but then as soon as they accept Jesus or whatever, then they become bigger assholes.
Yeah.
And we think they're superior. And the thing is that like, is that the way it's supposed to be? No, but is that commonly the way that it happens? Because there's something missing, and the core of what Christianity should be is missing, such that it gets turned into an abusive system of control, behavior management, performance pressure. Like it's all real in there. Like she I'm not going to be defensive because I'm a Christian, because those things happen.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
reality. Like, so like I found you and you're like a real person, and I care about what's real and honest. And like I really, and so I saw somebody being a superior asshole to you. I think that's the point at which like I messaged you privately, and I just started kind of talking to you on one of my night shifts, because like I was so upset about how he was talking to you, and I'm like, you're professing to be a Christian, but you're talking to her like this. And so I was even retweeting my responses to him to my page, because it wasn't like, hey, I'm trying to brown nose and get gold stars with you or whatever. It's like, this should not happen.
Yes.
This is not what Christian character should look like. This should not happen. And even if it's just me and my one freaking little light, this should not happen. And that's not how it should be, and so, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Well, speaking of that, how can people find you on Twitter?
Well, like my little
if you're okay with it.
Chloe HSPSDA, but hold on a minute. I think that I had a blank when I was making all this. So like, I think that my actual Twitter handle, hang on a minute. I mean, on the page, it says Chloe HSPSDA, but then it's at Chloe Murnahan, my first and last name.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
And, there's that, and you could take a screenshot and put it or something. And plus, I mean, we've talked and we've interacted, and, you can tag me or something like when you.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah. Because I'm going to, that's right. I was going to ask you to send me a headshot or something for the thumbnail, because I'm going to promote it later today at 8 p.m. when it's released.
And then let me look here on my Instagram. On my Instagram, it is, come here. Hold on a minute. On my Instagram, it's Chloe HSPSDA, and I think that the handle is as well, just at Chloe HSPSDA. And then there's some different stuff on my Instagram than on my Twitter, and there's places where like I have taken screenshots of my tweets and turned them into little Instagram posts. But
that's smart. That's what I should do. That would be great content.
It's nifty. And then actually, like, little fun fact, where it says Chloe, that was my handwriting, and it was like at a board meeting before, when I was still a pastor, and I was like, I did it without thinking, and I was like, I just wrote my name really nicely, and I took a picture of it, and I put it on a t-shirt, and now I use it as like my thumbnail, but it's like my handwriting.
Cool. Well, that is so cool. So thank you so much for coming on. For all of everyone who's watched the show, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe, and comment below some of your religious experiences, what you thought about our conversation today. Shout out to my Patreons. Right now, I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/beatthecult. And my patrons are Richard Dyes, Jason Morris, and Gino Kaplan. So thank all three of you for your support. And you can follow me on Twitter at Beat the Cult, Instagram, and I have one video on TikTok. So there you go. But thank you all for watching. Thank you so much, Chloe, again, for being on the show. And I will see you guys next week.
All right.
Bye, everyone.